Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Chat and Learn today. I am super excited to be here with all of you, and I can't wait to dive into this topic. If you tuned in early, we have an amazing speaker today, Karen, who I'm going to introduce in just a few moments, but she brings so many great insights into, how we can become better allies, foster more inclusive workplaces, at our own organizations, become and create more allyship within our own friendships and colleague relationships. Gosh, that's a terrible explanation, but I'm super excited to dive into this chat today. And before we get into the meat and potatoes of the conversation, I want to just go over a couple quick logistical items and housekeeping things, if you may. If you don't know who I am, my name's Lauren. I'm the Senior Manager of Marketing and Community for PowerToFly. We host these chats almost every single day about a different topic in a different industry with a different thought leader. So definitely check out our library of resources, sign up for an upcoming chat, rewatch our old chats, which brings us to the second piece of this logistical chat. We are recording today, so if you're feverishly taking notes or missed a question or two or had to step away from your desk, don't worry. I'll be sending out a link with the recording in the next few days, along with any resources that we talk about today. And especially our number one resource, which is Karen's book, which is kind of the focus of today's chat. And again, I'm really excited to kind of dive into all of the wonderful learnings Karen has had along this journey. The last piece that I want to talk to you all about is just kind of how these chats work. So like I said, I see a ton of familiar names on this call. So great to have you back. Can't wait to have you participating throughout the chat today. For all of you newcomers, welcome. This is going to be amazing. I ask if you can and have the ability to turn on your cameras to do so. When I think about, how these chats operate and what we're all trying to get out of this, I kind of think of them as the anti-webinars. There's no participant barrier where we're kind of just talking at you as the speaker and the host. I want you to engage. I want you to ask questions. I want you to come off mute and talk with us. And again, share your experiences. The point of this conversation and really what it's centering around is the questions that you submitted. So we're going to flip through those and I'll show you them in just a few minutes so you can kind of get an idea of everything we'll be discussing. But feel free to write your questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring it, your comments, again, your experiences, or hop off mute and feel free to ask them yourself. Why not? But without further ado, I am so excited to welcome Karen to the Chat and Learn stage today. So Karen, please tell us a little bit more about you, your background, and what you're going to be chatting about with us today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lauren, for hosting. And hi, everyone. I'm Karen Catlin. And as my bio shows here, I spent about 25 years working in tech, building software products. I have a computer science degree. I used to write code for a living. And then over time, I moved into leadership roles. And most recently, I was a vice president of engineering at Adobe. That said, over those 25 years, I noticed a decline happening in gender diversity, specifically in the tech industry. And so about 6 years ago, I decided to switch gears and start a coaching practice where I could provide leadership. And along the way, I love my new job, my new career. And along the way, I have started doing a lot of speaking about the topic, about whether it's diversity and inclusion or other things that tend to face challenges women face in the industry. And I've also broadened my perspective to include other underrepresented groups as well, not just women, but people of color, people of different sexual abilities, or sexual orientations and physical abilities and so forth. And so I'm thrilled to be here today to be talking about my latest book, Better Allies, Everyday Actions to Create Inclusive, Engaging Workplaces. And there's the picture of my book, and you can definitely get it on Amazon, as well as if you prefer to support your local indie bookstore, go in there and ask them and they can order it for you if they don't already have it in stock. Yeah, so thanks, Lauren. So I think that's probably about it, and we can dive into the questions. Is that good?
Yeah, that's great. And like I mentioned, I'll be sending you guys all a link to this book so you can all check it out. I know there's like an Audible version, which is awesome. I'm so into Audible audio books. I'm saying Audible because that's what I'm using, but they're awesome. So definitely download it or purchase it. It's a really, really great resource. But before we like actually ask the questions, I want to just pop them up on the screen really quickly so you guys can see, you know, exactly where the conversation is going to be going. If you have additional, oh, Scott says the Audible version is fantastic. Yay. Oh, a fan in the crowd. That's awesome. If you have follow-up questions to anything that, you know, is on my screen right now, try and hold your question till we get there. I'm going to pop to the second screen right now. But again, feel free to write more comments, questions, concerns, share your stories, your experiences as we go along. I'll be monitoring the chat. Just really excited to kind of get in and get started here. Okay, so our first question is, how did you decide to write this book? Great place to start.
Yes. So I gave you a little bit of insight into what I do today. I'm a leadership coach, and I've been doing this now 6-ish years. And when I first started, I was like so gung-ho. It's like, I am going to help women working in the tech industry learn better leadership skills, become more strategic, grow their careers, and stay in tech, because I wanted to keep every woman that was in tech there, if that's where they wanted to be. And I definitely can do that, but I started realizing very early on that even if I were like the most amazing leadership coach on the planet, which I don't think I am, but even if I were amazing, the most amazing person, and I was really just a pro at helping my clients, you know, lean into their careers, they still were facing a challenge. And the challenge they were facing is that most of their workplaces were not set up for them to be successful as a member of an underrepresented group. Most of their workplaces were not meritocracies. Meritocracies being places where you get ahead on your merit, your hard work, your abilities, your deliverables, and so forth. And instead, most of them worked in places where maybe there was some pretty decent diversity at the entry level, but as you got closer and closer to the C-suite, it got whiter and maler, and they didn't see a lot of role models for themselves, and they didn't necessarily see themselves being successful. So because of that, I was like, okay, I think that we need to engage the men in this conversation. This isn't all about women just getting better and fixing women and having women develop stronger leadership skills. It was also about having men be involved in creating more inclusive workplaces. So, you know, when I want to change the world, as one does, and as one does when they want to change the world, they start a Twitter handle, right? So I started a Twitter handle, and I was originally thinking this Twitter handle would be for male allies to help them understand what they could do. But it's interesting, the Twitter handle male allies was taken already. So I had to come up with a plan B, and so I chose better allies. And by the way, a little side note of that, I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad male allies was taken and I had to go with better allies, because very quickly I realized it's not just men who need to be allies, but really anyone who can have some privilege or power in the workplace really can be an ally. So better allies was actually a better fit for me. So I started tweeting from this Twitter handle, Better Allies. I started this idea of like, I just want to have affirmational, aspirational messages of things that people could be doing like on an everyday basis. They didn't have to be head of diversity and inclusion and belonging at their company. They didn't have to work in people operations or anything. It's just like, what can anyone just do to be a better ally? And so I started just tweeting different things, things that I was noticing from media reports or studies that were being done at research institutions, and picking up on, okay, if that's the research, what's the everyday action that someone can take to disrupt that situation or change the culture? And over time, this little Twitter handle started growing in popularity. I started getting some speaking requests for it, and I love public speaking, so I would say yes to all of them. And eventually, or inevitably, when I was giving a talk on this whole idea of like everyday actions to be better allies, people would ask, hey, Karen, do you have a book? It was always like, well, no, I don't. I probably should. And so I finally wrote the book. And so my book came out in January, and that's the backstory to how I got to this point, and really just how I came to be an advocate for inclusive workplaces and have this mindset around being a better ally. Yeah.
That is such an incredible story. I am fascinated by the little Twitter handle seed that's become such an amazing career, really.
Yeah,
a book.
The little Twitter handle it could, right? It just kept going.
So crazy, amazing. And I really love the idea too, and it's something we talk about a lot at PowerToFly, how women can support more women, because there's always this essence of competition that we feel against one another. And obviously I think we'll probably dive into more of, the ins and outs of that throughout the chat. But I'm kind of glad, you're right, that the male allies was taken, because, we can all be an ally one way or another. So I just think that's absolutely fascinating.
Absolutely. And I'll just build on that too. I am a woman who, when I was working in tech, I was part of the minority, definitely, but I have white skin. And that gives me so much more privilege than people of color. I have no visible disabilities, which again gives me more privilege and power. I'm straight and cis, and so on and so on. I mean, it's just like we have to realize that even though we feel like we're maybe associated with a minority group, an underrepresented group, we still have some opportunity to be an ally. And so I think it builds on exactly what you just said, Lauren.
Amazing. Yeah. Oh, I'm fascinated by this, and I can't wait to dive into these questions, because I think we're going to hit a lot of these specifics later on. And I'm going to get to Lisa's question after this, because I think it will be perfectly tied in here. But how can I communicate the intrinsic value of allyship for the ally rather than moral good to do act?
Yeah. So I certainly hope that people do feel like it is a moral imperative to help people who have less privilege and are from underrepresented groups. I hope that, but I also understand that at times we need to have a compelling reason that might be more business related or something else, like what's in it for me, what's in it for my company, why should we do this? And so there's so much research out there. And just to give some of the highlights of the research out there, why more diverse and inclusive workplaces are better for business. One is that McKinsey and Company has done studies and found that gender diverse companies are 15% more financially successful than their peer companies. And if they have racial diversity, they're 35% more financially successful. So financial results are better. The second is that diverse teams are better at solving difficult problems. And so there was a study by MIT, Carnegie Mellon, and Union College a few years ago that proved that, it's the solving of difficult problems. There's also research that shows that diverse teams are more innovative. And one way to track this or to measure this is by patents and looking at patent portfolios. And so the National Center for Women in Information Technology did a study of patent portfolios in software and hardware, and found that the gender diverse teams created patents that were more highly cited by other patents. And to be highly cited means that you represent significant research in your field, and other patents have to cite you to show how they're different or build upon your original citation. So again, financial performance, better at solving difficult problems, and more innovative. Those are like research that's out there showing the values of these things, of more diverse and inclusive environments. But on top of all of that, we in the United States have record low unemployment going on right now. And so why not cast the widest net possible and hire and retain people from all sorts of different backgrounds so that you actually can meet your hiring needs, which then of course fuels your eventual business growth. So those are all, to me, intrinsic value of why becoming a better ally leads to more diverse and inclusive workplaces and workforces, and all the business success you can achieve through that.
I love that you mentioned the McKinsey study, because that's one that we at PowerToFly quote all the time, and it's really great. So definitely check that out if you haven't. I want to answer, or I get to Tracy's question in the chat, and then we'll get to the next one, just because it directly relates to kind of what you just said. But how diverse does the team need to be to get those results? That's an interesting question.
It is such a good question, Tracy. I'm not sure I can answer that. I don't know if that has been surfaced in the research that I have consumed and read or not. I have to admit I haven't paid attention to that. I think that if that is something important and perhaps you are getting those kinds of questions like, well, how many women do we really need, or whatever that might look like, I'd encourage you to go and look at some of this research. And Lauren, I can provide you with a link that summarizes these research and provides links to the full study to include in the follow-up email so people can get that.
That would be amazing. Absolutely. And I'm trying to rack my brain on resources too, Tracy. I guess I would look at the teams which are, split. There's got to be some study where, they're showing like 40 to 30, like the different percentage breakdowns and how their performance is over one another. But obviously that's kind of one aspect of diversity. It goes back to like, what does diversity mean to your company? So yeah, that's a really great question. And yes, I would love to share the resource.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat too. I had it handy.
Perfect.
Yeah, good.
Awesome. So the next question, oh no, I skipped one. Hold on. Oh no, did my slides go out of order?
Oh, you know what? You and I both were editing and we had some duplicates. So
oh, okay. No.
I pulled out the duplicates. So sorry, I should have told you that ahead of time.
Oh my gosh, no worries at all. So the next one, I don't even think that this one's on here. So I might have just totally skipped this one actually altogether. But I'll say it, and then Lisa's question perfectly ties into this one. But how can we use allyship to spark culture change? And Lisa is asking in the chat, how do we start to rebuild a culture when we have a lot of new staff and everyone's obviously so busy?
Right. So the interesting thing about culture isn't what you say. Here are our values. Here's how we act. It's not what you say. It's what you do. And so I think that culture really needs to be embodied in everyday actions and how people are getting their work done and how they're treating other people and so forth. And as I think about creating new culture norms, for example, or onboarding people and so forth, you really have to be very specific about what is that culture that you want to change. Like, what is the new behavior? And then once you have that, start exploring how allies can reinforce that behavior, call it out, be good role models and ambassadors themselves of that behavior. Because again, the people who have the privilege, if you want to think about it as the alpha employees, the alpha males or the alpha females, the people with the privilege are often setting the tone for everyone else. Other people are looking to that person for how to act and how to show up. So, but I think you have to be clear, what is the behavior that you're trying to change, the new culture that you're trying to go towards. So like, for example, let me make this real with an example. Let's say that you wanted to change something that was happening during your annual performance reviews. And maybe right now, those annual performance reviews are rife with playing favorites. Some very vocal person who has a lot of the power in the room starts playing favorites and saying, I think that this person, my friend, my buddy, and so forth, deserves a higher ranking. Now, these conversations happen at the management level. And so there's maybe some favoritism that might be overlaid on top of an otherwise, sensible performance review process. And that's something that's identified. Like, we want to change that culture and have everyone be evaluated fairly and equitably. So then, if that's the decision, like, who is someone who has a lot of respect across the organization and respect in that leadership room, who can start changing themselves to have that behavior and not playing favorites, and also call it out in a respectful way. And this is the allyship action. It's an everyday action, is call it out when you see that favoritism happening. Something like, hey, we all agreed to use these criteria to evaluate the employees. Let's stick with that and tell us how your buddy Joe matches up against those, right? That's the everyday action, is to call it out. So that's just one example. This is a broad question around how can we use allyship to spark cultural change, but I think it's critical to engage allies in that process.
Absolutely. And that perfectly kind of ties into this next question, which is, how can I personally become a better ally to my peers and coworkers? And then the follow-up to that, what are things that you do each day to fuel a more inclusive environment?
Sure. So I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, I'm fearing, but I really believe in these everyday actions that lead to creating more inclusive environments. And especially, of course, everyday actions that support people from underrepresented groups. And so my book is just full of examples of that. The examples serve to raise awareness. I think this is step one, is if you want to be a better ally, is you have to be more aware of how people who are different than yourself experience the workplace. Maybe that is in meetings. Maybe that is in casual networking, Friday afternoon happy hours or something. Maybe it is in work assignments and who gets on the plum assignments or something. But you have to understand, well, I need to be more aware of how people in the workplace different than myself from these underrepresented groups are experiencing the environment so different than me, because I have so much privilege and power. I can, go and talk to people. I can speak my mind in meetings and not fear being, having any retribution. I can do all these things. So how is it different for other people? And then once you have that awareness, then there are these everyday actions to take to disrupt the normal behavior and to invite those people into those discussions, those meetings, and support them, and so forth. And so I'm going to give an example of what I mean by this. I remember, and this goes back about 2 years, I was doing a consulting project for a tech company here in Silicon Valley, where I am based. And this project I was doing, I was meeting with the women's employee group. And it was the leadership team of the women's employee group. And I was helping them do some strategic planning. Now, this leadership group had previously decided that we meet monthly, and so every time we meet, a different person will take the minutes for the meeting. So that was a rotating responsibility, so no one was saddled with having to do it every time. And so the one meeting I was at, that I'm telling you about, the organizer pulled up her list and to see who was to take the minutes, and she said, "Oh, Brian, it's your turn." Now, Brian was the only man on this leadership team for the women's group. He was like the male ally. It was nice to have his involvement. And he said, at that meeting, he said, I'm not that good at taking minutes. I think someone else should do it. And oh my gosh, how things happen in our days, and we can't think of the right thing to say in the moment. And maybe later on, as we're driving home or like lying in bed trying to fall asleep at night or something, we think of the perfect thing to say. I mean, that happens all the time, right? Well, this day, I thought of the perfect thing to say, and it was a good ally move. I simply said, "Hey, Brian, practice makes perfect, and this is the perfect place to practice." Because there was no way I was going to let him, especially being the only man in the room, not do his fair share of the housework of that meeting, taking the minutes for that meeting. And so that's an example of what I mean is, like, once you're aware that this stuff happens, you can have ways to speak up and become a better ally for those, your peers, your coworkers. And by the way, if you're ever not sure what's going on, what you could be doing for a coworker, is in private, you could have a conversation with them just one-on-one and say, "Hey, I want to make sure you're feeling like you belong here and that you can do your best work here. What's one thing I could be doing to best support you?" And I bet they're going to have some ideas for you. So think about doing that. And in terms of the secondary question here, what are things that I do every day to create a more inclusive environment? Well, first of all, I am a company of one, so my environment is very inclusive because it's just me, and I always include myself. But more seriously, like, I do this work every day, and my approach to spreading the word is I'm consuming constantly about what the challenges are that people are facing. And I do that through Twitter and in various news groups that I'm a part of, in Slack channels. And then again, I'm looking for those everyday actions, which I then share out. I share it out on my Twitter handle. I'm very active on that Twitter handle at Better Allies, to spread the word and get more people thinking about these everyday actions. And I also have a newsletter I send out every Friday called 5 Ally Actions, where I do kind of a roundup of some of the things I've been sharing on Twitter that have especially been popular and have really resonated and struck a chord with people, so that I can summarize those and share them out so people get more ideas. Yeah.
I love that. I'm just fascinated. I'm with Sarah in the chat, who's going to lock that practice makes perfect. So this is a great place to practice. I'm putting that in my toolbox for later. I absolutely love that. So thank you for sharing. These examples are wonderful. I can't even imagine what your book is filled with if we're just getting a taste here.
Yeah, it's filled with stories. I love storytelling. Yeah.
That's awesome. Did I skip a question again? Oh no, I went backwards. Gosh, my clicker is so off and my mouse needs new batteries.
That's okay.
So I'm going to go through this question, and actually got another follow-up question to this one in the chat, which is perfect. So how do you inspire others who could be great allies, but haven't yet made the connection that they can leverage their identities, privilege, and power to help make the workplace better and more equitable for all? In other words, what typically drives people to take that first step and become an ally? And the follow-up question is, how do you find allies at your company when you're in the position of looking for a new job and you don't have much power as like a new person or new candidate?
Yes, definitely. Okay, so the first part of the question I'll answer first, and I think it is okay to ask someone to up their ally game, is basically what I want to say. Here's what I mean. Let's say that you are someone from an underrepresented group and you are consistently being talked over in a meeting. You're starting to say something and then someone else interrupts you and says their piece instead. Now, if you speak up on your own behalf, it's like, wait a second, I was talking or I wasn't finished. That's great if you feel that you can actually say that. But sometimes you're like, I'm going to get, I'm going to lose my power if I start like showing, I'm going to seem like I'm greedy, I'm selfish, it's all about me, like I don't want to go there. Or you're just not feeling comfortable enough to stand up and advocate for yourself. And I get it. So if you can't go there, a better thing would be to engage an ally afterwards, before the next meeting that's going to happen, and just let that person know, hey, I'm getting interrupted a lot in the meetings, and I think I have some valuable ideas to share and contributions to make. So the next time it happens, do you mind stepping in on my behalf and just saying something like, hey, I like to hear Haley finish her thought. Say something simple like that. And so that's a great way to engage an ally. And if you're already in that meeting and you're being interrupted by some people, you'll know who your allies are. I mean, you can read the room, who has some of that kind of power, who has that empathy probably, who might only need an invitation so that they are aware this is happening to you, and ask them to start standing up and be an ally for you. So that's like one example. Another example is I was talking to a client who was working on a project with one coworker. She was working with a male coworker on this one project, and they were going in and meeting with their manager once a week to give an update on the project. And the manager, a man, would never make eye contact with my client, the woman. He only looked at the other man. And he only asked questions of the other man about the project, the status and what was going on. He would never ask my client any questions. And she, of course, felt less than, even though it was a pure relationship. She felt less than, she felt not respected, she felt invisible. And so she asked her male colleague, do you know this is going on? This is kind of weird. I want to be, can you stand up for me? Can you do something? And so in the next meeting, there was some question the manager asked the man, and he said, Jane is the expert on that API that we are talking about, she should answer the question. And he forced the manager to basically look at my client and look her in the eyes and get the information from her. So these are just two examples of how you can engage allies and get them to up their ally game and to step up. So hopefully that's helpful in answering that question. And I've already forgotten the follow-up. Oh, was it more you're like brand new at a company?
How do you like find that ally or like build that allyship?
Yeah. So ideally, you're going to be able to do good work right from the get-go and start building your credibility, your reputation, your street cred, so to speak, on and be able to attract people who can be your sponsor and be your ally as a result of your hard work and your contributions. But also just start building your network internally, building your network, especially with maybe people who you wouldn't normally be networking with, people who are different than you. If you're a junior engineer on the team, why not make it be very strategic and start going to lunch maybe with the senior engineers and just say, hey, can I join you for lunch today? Can I sit next to you in that meeting, and can you explain some things to me that are going on, because I don't know the whole lay of the land here yet. Like reach out to people and start building your connections and have them then be the people that you can engage as allies.
I actually love that you just mentioned that. And, we're kind of going through something like that at PowerToFly where we have a lot of new people starting, and, I was kind of looking through some of the onboarding docs, and I kind of stopped when I see this like humongous bubble that says like, send meeting invitations to like 20 people. I'm like, why does this person like need to talk with this tech person? This person's in marketing. Like, that's crazy. But then after kind of sitting through like the doc a little bit, it's like, no, this makes perfect sense. Like, let's connect our new teammates with as many people. And especially at PowerToFly, where we're remote, where we're global, where the cultures are so different, let's connect this new person with as many people as possible, so they feel comfortable. And I think that was just, a genius move. And I'm sure it was either Catlin or Milena who put that in place, our two wonderful co-founders. But it just really stood out to me. And I was like, that's really great that we do that. So I think that's a great tip too. Awesome. Next question. I am tasked with building the diversity and inclusiveness culture and HR initiative in my company. Where do I start? Big question.
It is a big question. And I definitely am one of these people. It's like, I hate reinventing the wheel. So I appreciate this question deeply, because why reinvent the wheel? There are so many companies and people who've already done exactly this, especially around like HR initiatives. So, my advice here, because this is not my specialty per se, I don't set up these programs and HR initiatives, but my advice is to join Diversity Advocates. And they're an organization, it's a nonprofit, it's called diversityadvocates.com. You can go there, sign up, and it is the most helpful Google email group list that I've ever been on. People, like, you literally can ask for help with resources, or I'm thinking about hiring a consultant to help me set up our whole employee resource group structure, or whatever it might be. And there will be people who will chime in with, here's my experience, here's the person that I would recommend you talk to, or here is the best practice that has been published already and shared with the group. So diversityadvocates.com, I think, is just here. I'll put that in the chat as well. Is an amazing resource. I am on that email list as well, so I know the power of it. And then I will say, if you have budget to do this, there are consultants who specialize in this. And again, Diversity Advocates, if you sign up for that group, they will be able to tell you exactly the right people to use for your needs.
Amazing. I wrote that down. So I'm glad to have that resource. Thanks for sharing.
Sure.
Love this question too. I love all of these, but this one kind of stuck out. Where can I incorporate more inclusive language at work to make the largest impact? And I feel like this is just like the easiest way for all of us to become more allies, and no one's perfect. I think I've said, hey guys already like 4 times in this call. And that's my personal, piece I'm working on.
We all have them. And I certainly have, I guess, modified my language most recently to not use hey guys. It comes out very easily. And, and some people think guys is gender neutral. And all I want to say to that, if you're one of those people, is that imagine you are a woman and you need to use a public restroom and you find a door that's marked guys. Would you go in? Probably not, right? It seems like that is clear indication on a restroom door that it's for men. So I don't think guys is as gender neutral as we think it is. And it can make some people feel like, wait a second, you're talking to a group of, engineers who typically are men and you're using the word guys. It's like, it just feels like I don't belong. There are other examples too, though. And so just quickly, some other examples are things like, and this is a true story. My daughter was studying computer science in college, and she got a programming assignment in the class that she was in. And there was a comment in the code that said, man up and edit the sample code, right? And she's like, man up, like, why do I have to be a man to write this code, right? It seems so small, but these things add up to underrepresented people. Another example, in our software, we're often using the term blacklist to talk about, we're whitelisting and blacklisting different options. And so maybe we're blacklisting sites, websites that are risky and might introduce viruses and whatever it might be. It might be security violations. So we use this term whitelist and blacklist. Well, think if you're a person of color and you're in this meeting and everyone's talking about blacklisting certain sites. Like, it's just like a reminder that you have come from a different racial group and have faced these challenges, these blacklisting kind of challenges firsthand in your heritage. So there are so many examples of this that we can be careful of and be more aware that our language sometimes is not as inclusive as it might, as it could be. And I will share with you, I think one approach to doing this is to, if you're on Slack, for example, is to create a Slack bot that flags non-inclusive language and then suggests alternatives to use in the moment. So Lauren, like if you were in the Slack group and you're like, hey guys, where should we go for lunch today, or whatever it was, whatever casual thing, the Slack bot would actually respond with, guys is not gender neutral. Have you considered using folks? Hey folks, something like that. And by the way, if this is of interest, I'm in a Slack group that has exactly this bot, and I got permission from them to open source it. So if you go to betterallies.com, and I'll put this in the list as well, betterallies.com/language, it explains how you can get a copy of these rules basically and incorporate it into your own Slack group if that's of interest. So I think that having that kind of a reminder, and you can edit it and tune it to meet your needs, but it's a good reminder every day that that things, you can change your language and you start learning new things. I'm seeing Scott asking, is ladies and gentlemen still considered appropriate? I'd stay away from that, Scott, and primarily because ladies is a term that harkens back to a time when there were women of nobility, and those women were tended, the value was that they were demure, they were lesser than their husbands, they were quiet, they were reserved. And it's really not appropriate to use that anymore because we want to treat women as equals. In fact, the London Tube a few years ago changed their announcements over the speakers in the tube itself. And they used to say things like, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And they've changed that to just say, good morning, everyone, or something like that. It really isn't that hard to come up with an alternative. So I think if the London Tube can do it, especially with their heritage with nobility, we all can do it. Thank you. And Kristen also writes, yes, ladies and gentlemen, suggests that gender is binary, which it is a spectrum today, and I think we need to be aware of that as well. Yep, yes, definitely. Was there one other thing about language? Scott also says he reminds himself lately to use titles consistently. Yes, titles being honorifics like doctor or something like that. I think that's a really good example. If you're talking about Dr. So-and-so, when they're men, you're aimed at men, do it for every gender as well. Don't just do it only for men. I'll also say my mother, who I love and hopefully will not listen to this, but she's someone who is older, and she's always talking about, well, today the male nurse came over. Like, it's like, well, what's the big deal about a male nurse? Like, why reinforce that having a male nurse is so unusual and so not expected. And it's kind of like saying, well, the lady cop, it's like, well, she's just a cop, right? Or the female engineer, she's just an engineer. So being mindful of how we're using titles, but also those gendered kind of stereotypes that we might be placing in front of different titles as well. Yeah.
Such great examples. I didn't even think of, male nurse. I have so many friends that are male nurses, but I think I've said that term so many times. And I think that's just such a huge piece of this. It's like self-awareness. I say, hey guys, all the time, but I'm like being self-aware in the fact that like I'm diligently trying to switch and say something like, hey team, or hey everyone.
Yes.
So, if all of us just take one thing away from this, it's like there are so many options and ways that, small ways we can make an impact, language being one of them.
Yeah.
So thank you to whoever asked this question. I knew this would be a good one. So appreciate it. Okay. So how can we effectively address microaggressions in the moment without escalating the situation or stopping productive flow? So I kind of interpreted this as, like the female microaggression, but Karen, totally, interpret it how you may.
Yeah, it can be any kind of microaggression. And for people who might not be familiar with that term, a microaggression is really, kind of break it down. It's a small aggression against someone. And it's so small that if it was the only time it ever happened, it really shouldn't be a big deal. Such as someone calling me, a female engineer. It's like one time, like big deal. But microaggressions are never just one time. They are continual and they wear you away. They wear you down. I love an example someone gave that I include in my book is imagine that someone, like you're on a subway one day and someone steps on your foot. Happens once, like, yeah, it hurts a little bit. Hopefully you didn't have flip-flops on, but it hurts a little bit and it's like not a big deal. But when it happens every day, it starts to really get to you and you start to expect it's going to happen and anticipate the pain and so forth. So these microaggressions do add up. They're like death by 1,000 cuts. And they really create a sense of not belonging somewhere, of not being a part of the crowd, of not being part of the team. So what I really like with microaggressions is you really need to say something when you see them happening. Otherwise, you are complicit. You are part of the problem because even though you're not doing these yourself, you're not saying anything. So I do think it's important to speak up when you do see a microaggression happening. And it doesn't have to be, well, it's not always easy to do this, but it doesn't have to be that hard either. And I like to think of having some stock phrases that I have in my back pocket that I can pull out whenever I need to use them, because I don't always think of it in the moment. So these stock phrases might be things like, well, what makes you say that? If someone tells a Latina coworker of yours, like, wow, your English is really good. And you respond with, what makes you say that, right? It forces the person who's said it to rethink their thought process and maybe understand that there is some bias going on, that they don't expect a Latina to have good English. Another one of these pat phrases, these phrases that you can pull out when you need them, when you see microaggressions, is something like, imagine if someone asked the only woman on the team to order dinner. Everyone's working late and there's only one woman there, and like, can you order dinner? Having that, someone respond with, well, why do you think she's the best person to order dinner for us? Again, to make that, force the thinking of like, whoa, I guess I am a little biased, assuming a woman's better at ordering food. And then another favorite of mine is, saying something like, oh, we don't do that here. Especially when someone, maybe there's some off-color joke happening, or someone is complimenting like, oh, some of the interns are really cute, something like that. You can just say, we don't do that here. And that helps reinforce the culture that, the cultural norms that you do want to have in place. So I have so many more of these in my book, but I thought I would share just those 3 to just give an example of how to effectively address these microaggressions.
That's amazing. And again, thank you for sharing the examples. They're so helpful because, again, a lot of these things have become so quote unquote normal that we forget how they can be misinterpreted, or, you know, in the moment, like you said, how do I react? Like, it's one of those, you know, I wish I said this moments. So
Yeah.
that's really great to have phrases in your back pocket to use. Our next question, which I love, can you share your thoughts regarding ally as a label or identity, similar to other descriptors like humble, generous, empathetic? It seems like true allyship is not something to be claimed, achieved, self-applied, but rather granted by those who you serve because of how you serve.
Absolutely. I can't agree more with this. You know, in my book and in my newsletter, I use the phrasing of, you know, being an ally is a journey. And I really believe you're never done. There is more that we all can do to be great allies, and we should continually be looking for those opportunities to be allies and kind of keep upping our game in terms of our allyship skills. I don't think we're ever done. Even if we were, it is not our title to claim. I do believe it is something that other people should say about us. You know, I believe you're a good ally. Thank you for being my ally, those types of things. But we should never say, we are an ally. I completely agree with that. It's for someone else to notice that we're doing and to give it to us. Yeah, and yeah. So I guess that's it. I don't know if I have anything else to say.
No, I love that. That's a great answer. And thanks for whoever asked this. You guys, again, asked wonderful questions for this chat. Scott, do you have, oh, you asked that? Oh, yay, good one.
I'll say one other thing. And thank you, Scott, for saying, you know, raising your hand there. I have to admit that in my book, I had becoming an ally is a journey. And my editor was like, oh no, you never become an ally. And it gets to this question itself. It's like, you're never there. So we changed the word. It was so simple, but we changed it to being an ally is a journey, because it's more of a process. It's subtle, but anyway, I think it was interesting. My editor picked up on that.
I love that. That's incredible. Amazing story. So I sit on the board of a local nonprofit, and I am having great consternation with them regarding their willful ignorance where matters of inclusion come into play, mostly with non-Christians and the LGBTQIA population. Do you have any advice for combating this bias?
Oh, yes. You know, I listened to Michelle Obama's new book, Becoming, recently. Maybe some other people have read or listened to that as well. And one of the things she has in there is, and I think she had it on her t-shirts for her book launch and stuff. It's harder to hate up close. It's harder to hate people you know, that you spend time with. And hate is a strong word. I'm not saying that in this question, but I think that the underlying message of it's hard to hate up close is really critical. It's hard to be biased against people that we really are spending time with, that we're seeing as equals, that we are building our empathy towards too, just because they're different than us, and we shouldn't assume that different means bad, or different means we can ignore them or make fun of them or not support them or whatever that might be. So to the person who asked this question, you know, I just wonder, is there a way, an opportunity for these board members to spend time with non-Christians or the LGBTQ plus community? Is there a way for them to work on some volunteer projects with them, or to attend any kind of meeting for people where it's okay for them to attend, and so that they can understand what this is all about? You know, I'll just share with you. I am Christian, and after the synagogue shooting in Philadelphia, I don't remember when that was, sometime in the last 6 months, members of my group, we decided to show some solidarity to our local synagogue here on the West Coast, and we actually went to attend their Saturday services because we wanted to show support, but also it was a great way for me to understand some of the culture that happens in this other community. So that's an example of what I mean by spending time with these people. But I also will share with you that there are potentially opportunities, and I don't know what this nonprofit is all about, but there are opportunities. For example, in the tech industry, there is a big conference called Lesbians Who Tech. And it's held once a year, and they love having allies come to their conferences and speak at their conferences and just be part of the conversation. So that's an example of how allies can come to an event that's not necessarily for them, but to really learn about the organization, learn about the community, learn about the challenges these people are talking about, and understand it better, and understand how to be a better ally. And by the way, if you're ever not sure, like, hey, can a non-Jewish person go to synagogue, or can a straight man go to a Lesbians Who Tech event, or whatever it is? Just ask. It is sometimes events will say it right on the website page for the event, but it's okay to just ask an organizer, is it okay if I come? Because I want to listen and learn. So hopefully, Lisa says in the chat, hopefully I'm talking about the Pittsburgh shooting. Yes, I was talking about the shooting in the synagogue in Pittsburgh, not Philadelphia. Thank you, Lisa, for correcting me there. Tragic. And so I didn't need to get that wrong. So anyway, hopefully that helps the person who asked the question about her nonprofit.
Yeah, and I wanted to add too, it seems like a perfect opportunity for this person to, act as an ally and maybe take this person or people, or use your allyship to bring them to one of these events, because, sometimes, all right, I can imagine it would be pretty daunting for this person to go alone, or, feel very unsupported. So, that's an opportunity, I think, for this person to kind of step up and, be a support system for this person who may not be. So,
love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I like that. So we have about, 7 minutes left. So if anyone has any other pressing questions, we have 2 more pre-submitted ones. So pop them in the chat now so we can get to them before we stop. But let's not waste any more time. Oh, we love feedback at PowerToFly. So thank you to whoever asked this as well. What are your best tips for giving feedback? And this can be so touchy, I can imagine,
Yeah. Yes.
depending on your power. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's research that I've studied that shows that, first of all, vague feedback holds people back from growing their careers. So we need to give feedback to people to help them grow their careers, whether we are a manager giving feedback to our direct reports, or just we're giving peer feedback to people we work with, right? So we should be giving very good constructive feedback, but we don't always. And the second thing is that men tend to get feedback that is more closely tied to business goals. Here's the work you've done, specific behaviors, and here's how it had a positive impact on the business. And here's some new skills to learn to have a bigger impact. And women tend to get less of that feedback. There is a study done by Stanford that studied thousands of annual performance reviews at 3 large tech companies and a professional services company. And this is what they found. Okay, there was a huge difference in the gendered, by gender in the way we give feedback. And also women got much shorter reviews, meaning that there was less meat there, there's less stuff there, there's just less feedback, right? So it's interesting. There's also research done by Mckinsey again and the Lean In organization that found that we tend to hold back from giving constructive feedback, kind of the hard feedback, the difficult feedback. We hold back from giving it to people who are different than us. And here's what this looks like. If we are a man, we might not give the real difficult feedback to a woman because we might be thinking, we don't want her to think we're sexist. So we're not going to give her the tough feedback, right? If we're a white person, we may not give it to a person of color because we don't want them to think we're racist and that we're picking on them with this feedback, right? If we are a college grad, we might hold back from giving feedback to someone who doesn't have a college degree, or maybe went to a boot camp to learn programming if we are in the tech industry, right? We hold back because we don't want them to think we're biased against people who don't have college degrees like ourselves, okay? So I think we should check our bias, understand that these biases tend to exist before we're giving feedback, and then make sure that we are giving feedback of how the person's work is tied to the business outcome. Not just like, hey, you did a good job, but you did such a good job prioritizing our work that it helped us ship the product on time, something like that, right? So give feedback. Don't shy away from giving the hard feedback, and tie it to business outcomes. And make sure you're giving feedback of roughly the same length. All of those things should be easy to do, right? If we are just aware of those are some best practices.
And I would just add often. You know, we practice that a lot at PowerToFly.
I like that, yes.
Every call that we have, you know, usually when there's multiple people on, you know, whoever's leading the call asks, you know, what are 2 things I could have done better? What are 2 things I could have done really great? And then, you know, just any other additional feedback. And, you know, that kind of just puts the whole practice of feedback, makes it a more, you know, everyday mundane task rather than your annual performance review when it's,
Love
you know,
that. Yeah. Yep.
so I love all of these tips. They're wonderful. Okay. So last question here. When interviewing with a company, how can you ask them about diversity and inclusion? I've been doing a lot of interviewing in the last month, and I've talked with white men over and over and over again.
Yep. Yeah. So there, you can ask them. I mean, interviewing is a two-way street, right? You should have questions prepared about the role and about the company and about the culture and everything, and about diversity and inclusion. One idea for a question is ask these white men, you know, why is diversity and inclusion important to you? And the answer should be pretty telling. They may not be able to say anything. It's like, it's just fine here, you know, and they don't really say much. But then they might do something and tell you like, oh, it's so important to me that I volunteered to be a mentor for our engineers of color group. And, you know, that's telling. They're spending their time mentoring other people. It may be something else. But so just ask them, why is this important to you? Or what do you personally do to support a more inclusive environment? Ask them. It's okay. Interviewing is a two-way street. And depending on what they, you know, respond with, maybe you can explore it a little more, tell me more about that, whatever that looks like. But I would absolutely be asking the white men in the room, in the interview room, what they're doing to support diversity and inclusion.
And actually something I learned from our chat yesterday that I found fascinating, and I have had chat after chat after chat with recruiting manager, hiring manager, you name it. And this is the first time I heard it. So I'm going to definitely share it with all of you guys. But you guys, people, oh my gosh, I am going to get better at it. I'm holding myself accountable. But this woman said basically, you know, don't be afraid to ask is there a woman I could speak to during the interview process? Is there another person of color that I could talk to? You know, the hiring managers value, you know, you wanting to talk to more team members and, you know, get another perspective. And the hiring manager that we interviewed yesterday was the head of talent acquisition at Metro Mile. She basically said, like, when a candidate asks me to talk to someone, you know, who we would consider, you know, a diverse team member, you know, we really value that because, you know, this candidate wants to know more of our team and who we are and how everyone feels about our culture and company. So, you know, absolutely, if you're not interviewing with any women, just ask if you can talk to one. And if they can't set you up to talk to another woman, I feel like that's a huge red flag. Or there's just no women that work there, which would also be crazy. But this is great. So I don't see any other questions in the chat. And this was my last one. So we're right at time. So I'll give you like 30 more seconds. If anyone has anything else that they want to add, contribute, ask in the chat. If not, I want to say, Karen, thank you so much. This chat was so valuable. I learned so much. I can't wait to read your book. I'm definitely going to add that to my Audible list. But thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm just typing that in the chat. Thanks everyone for coming and spending some time with me.
Yes, and to everyone who tuned in, thank you as well. Like I said, I'll be sending out a link with this recording, a link to Karen's book, all of the wonderful resources that she shared today and will share with me later via email. But again, thank you so much for coming, and make sure to join us tomorrow. We're chatting about why women should learn to code. So definitely sign up, and I'll see you again soon.
All right.
Thanks,
bye, everyone. Thank you.